Ready? We're just going to start with introductions, so I'll let Lauren start, and then we'll just work our way around the room.
Yeah, first, quick thank you guys for all being here today. I know it's been kind of a long process to get to almost ready to start this program, but we're really excited to be at that stage. I'm Lauren Moore. I'm with Burns McDonnell, and I am representing the Green Infrastructure Task Lane for the Smart Sewer Program.
I'm Ashley Schmalberg. I'm with Vireo, so I'm going to be the maintenance program manager, so I'll be the project manager that you will be contacting during your maintenance.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Nelson. I'm with Vireo, and I do a lot of the maintenance inspections.
Craig Rudge with Vireo. I'm a principal owner at Vireo.
I'm Brent Spangler, landscape architect at Vireo.
All right, so this is a quick overview of what we're going to be covering today. So we're going to give you a brief introduction to the Smart Sewer Program, and then we're going to talk about the individual green infrastructure components that you will see when you're on site. So giving an introduction to those. Some of you may be familiar with some of those, but some may not. Then we're going to get into kind of the process of the maintenance program and some of the typical tasks you guys will be performing. And then we're going to get into talking about some weed identification and removal methods, as well as some of the common plants you guys will be seeing when you're on site. Do I need to speak louder? Sorry, I speak very softly, so I'll try to speak louder.
So, real quick before we get going, I want to show of hands. Who knows what green stormwater infrastructure really means, or what it is? We got. Just kind of want to know who we're talking to and kind of what depth we need to get into. So we'll make sure everybody understands that first off.
Yeah, and then at the end, you guys can ask questions, and we do have a 15-question quiz, so make sure you are listening intently.
Yeah, so the way this works is we'll run through the training and then we'll give this assessment, and from that assessment you guys will get the KC Water certification for the program, for the maintenance program. So please stop us throughout if anything's not making sense or you have questions or you want us to kind of slow down and revisit something. We'd like this to be as interactive as it can be. So I guess just to start, some terminology things. GSI, you'll probably hear us say a lot. That means Green Stormwater Infrastructure, just kind of a short acronym for that. Green infrastructure can be known as a lot of different things. Sometimes you'll hear it called stormwater BMPs or something else, but it all comes down to the same term. GSI is what we're talking about, and that's what we'll consistently use within this program. Impervious area, that really means any sort of pavement or hard surface that doesn't let water soak into the ground. So in general, when it comes to stormwater, impervious area is what causes stormwater runoff, and that's where we're trying to control water from with our GSI. Infiltration, on the flip side of that, is any ground that lets water soak into it. So think about grass surfaces or soils, and that's really the type of function that we're trying to get out of our GSI in a lot of instances. We're trying to let water soak in, give it a place to go that is not our sewer systems. Fire retention facility, that's probably the most common type of GSI that you'll see in this program anyway, but it's just a type of GSI that's intended to store stormwater and really mimic the natural processes that you see in nature within our built areas. And then gray infrastructure is really impervious pavements that generate runoff. Our pipe systems, our inlets, the more of the typical infrastructure that you see. That's what we mean when we say gray infrastructure. So a little bit of background for you guys on the Smart Sewer Program, because that's really why we have this maintenance program in general. It's a 30-year long infrastructure investment that the city has made really to improve the water quality of our streams and to protect the public health and the built environment. So we've got a lot of old sewers, and really the charge of this program is to repair those sewers to reduce what we call sanitary sewer overflows and combined sewer overflows, which is really just a fancy way of saying letting wastewater into our streams. So the city is under a federal consent decree, like many other cities, to reduce the amount of wastewater that we let discharge to our streams every single year. And really that is what the primary purpose of green infrastructure as it's being used in Kansas City is for, is to help us take some of the water off of that system and try to reuse it in nature the way it was initially intended. So stormwater management, just background and principles. Water flows downhill. I think we can all at least appreciate that much. But as it does that, it picks up pollutants, trash, debris, all kinds of things that tend to pollute our waterways. Typically, especially in built areas, as it gets to the bottom of a hill, we've got what we call an inlet or a catch basin, and it's going to get into our traditional pipe system that way. Continue to travel down that pipe system until it eventually reaches a creek, river, or stream and lets water out there. So what we have in Kansas City is a combined sewer system. And again, many other communities are built on these as well. But basically how we used to develop, before we did it the way we do it now, we would build one pipe. So one pipe that would collect water from both your wastewater sources, so you flush your toilet, goes in that pipe, as well as our stormwater. So that comes together in a single pipe, and that's called combined sewage. And when things are dry, when it's not raining, all of that water goes to our wastewater treatment plant and is treated and discharged. But when we get wet weather, when it rains, and even just a little bit of rain, less than half an inch of rain, that pipe system becomes overwhelmed and it overflows. And that's what we call a combined sewer overflow. So basically too much water gets in there when it rains, it's allowed to fill up and then spill out into our waterways, and that's where we've got basically untreated sanitary combined with stormwater discharges. So that's something we obviously want to avoid. We want to reduce the occurrences for. And again, one of the big reasons we're using green infrastructure to do that. We do have separate sewer areas in the city as well. Usually those are in your newer developed areas around town, but the way we develop today, we put stormwater flows and sanitary flows in two separate pipes. So you flush your toilet, that goes in one pipe that goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and then your stormwater that's picked up on the street goes in another pipe that goes to the creek. That still has its own water quality issues, but in general, that's how we develop now. So the way that green infrastructure helps us to manage the stormwater or the combined sewer overflows is it captures that stormwater runoff before it gets to those pipe systems. So it will often work with gray infrastructure, so you'll see what we call GSI components that help it to collect, capture, store stormwater. But ultimately our goal is to keep it from getting back to that sewer system, or at least slow it down before it gets back to that sewer system so that we don't cause an overflow event. So in general, green infrastructure is going to be consisting of soil and rock and plants. And it's really just giving water space to go, let it soak into the ground as much as we can, or temporarily hold it before we let it back into that sewer system again, ideally after that storm has happened, so that we don't overwhelm that pipe system, get it too full again.
You mean like potentially dam it, like hold it up, just like cut it off from the where everything's going?
Yep, pretty much. So like a lot of the times you'll see an inlet and a low point, and you'll see a green infrastructure that's just above that. So it's trying to divert those smaller storms, and it's trying to hold that and get as much of it in place, held there, kind of dammed up like you said, before it can get to that pipe system that's just downstream of it. Okay. So we're going to kind of talk about two categories of GSI. We're going to dry and wet to distinguish between, but in general, dry basins are meant to be dry most of the time. All of these are meant to be wet when it rains, but dry basins should dry out within 48 or so hours after a storm. And that's something I want everyone to be aware of, because if you are out on a site doing maintenance and you see water that's being held there and we haven't had rain in over a week, that's indicative of a bigger problem that's going on in that basin, and that's something that we would want you guys to relay back to us, because we're going to have to start looking into, okay, why isn't this basin draining? But in general, dry basins will be single basins, or they can be multiple linked basins in series. So you could have basins on a hill that kind of cascade down into each other, but they are intended to control the flow, slow it down, infiltrate that stormwater, and really treat it before it gets back to the system. Some different types of those, you'll hear different terminology, but we've got infiltration trenches, which are typically just rock. A lot of the times you won't see vegetation in those at all. So you might see those around some of the perimeters of the sites that you guys work on, but in general that's going to look like a decorative rock trench on the surface. Bioswale is just a different type of way to implement bioretention. So I mentioned that bioretention is the most common form you see, but in general, that'll have a soil layer, an engineered soil layer, and a lot of times there's rock underneath it. A bioswale is really just that, but it's on a hillside. So you'll usually see a series of dams that are intended to kind of impound or hold some of that water back as it moves down the hill. You'll see bioretention on the roadside a lot of the time, so that's going to look like just a typical planter. The way you can distinguish this from a typical planter, though, is it should be lower than the road itself. So water is intended to go into those basins. A lot of the times with traditional planters, that's going to be set above a curb line, which is not what we want, right? That's not going to let water into it. So that's kind of an easy way to distinguish between a bioretention roadside basin and more of a traditional planter that's along the road. A bioretention basin, just kind of as in its blanket form, is just going to be a lower area. So it's going to be, again, it looks like a traditional garden, but it's going to be sunken down because we're trying to give that water a place to go. And then dry detention basins we have as well, which usually don't have as many of the native plants in them. It might just be a grass basin that you're mowing. Sometimes they do have native plants too, so it's just important to understand what's supposed to be there before we start doing work on those basins. And then wet basins are intended to be wet most of the time, or at least intended to have some areas that have a permanent pool of water. So they're designed specifically to hold stormwater, so you'll see wet ponds, and the way that these work is basically we've got a permanent pool of water, stormwater comes, we've got a rain event, it fills up temporarily and then it drains back down to that permanent pool, but there should always be water in that pool itself. Some different types of these that you'll see are wet ponds and extended detention wetland facilities is what we call them.
So in the system, we broke the system down into what we call components, and a list of them is on the screen, so I'm going to kind of step through those. The way we design them is by these components. So for you guys to understand what each component is and why it's there helps with the maintenance of it. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. So again, this is an example of a rendering of kind of showing all the components. And you can see there's an inlet up in the upper that's pulling water off of this parking lot or this street. It's filling the basin. There's the soil growing medium, which we have our plants in, and you'll get very familiar with that. We have what we call a choker course, an aggregate course, and that's really just filtering the system as it gets lower and lower in it. We want to filter out any of the sediment so it doesn't clog our system. And then basically at the end you have an overflow pipe of some kind, and you'll see it in probably most every one of your guys' systems. You'll see this overflow. You will notice in this diagram that overflow is higher than the layer itself, and that's so it does pool up for some period of time. And obviously we show the native landscaping, so we'll kind of step into this a little bit. So on inlets, you're going to see many different types. I know everybody here has different facilities that you'll be maintaining. We just kind of want to get an overview of what you might see, and each company we will work with individually to make sure you understand your specific facilities when we get to that point. Inlets can be many different things. We have gutter aprons here where it's pulling water off of a street, and you can see how it actually has this little low area that's to collect sediment so we don't put dirt into our system because that does clog it. We have trench drains. These manufactured inlets, we have several of those in our city. The same thing, it's to pull sediment from the system before it fills up and then spills into it. And then just your general basic curb cut, and you'll always see some sort of erosion control measure behind that. Any questions on inlets? Energy dissipation. So a lot of times we need to slow the water down as we enter it into our system. If we don't, it's going to erode it. So you'll see many different types of this, whether it be just concrete rip or rock rip wrap, some manufactured systems, some weirs that kind of just fill and they'll fill and spill and fill and spill and fill and spill. And every time we do that, we're slowing that water down. So as we kind of move through this, you'll see many different kinds.
One thing I guess to focus on here with the inlets and the energy dissipation, they're intended to collect all the gunk that's coming
Yeah.
off the street, so all the pollutants that come in. So this is where we see the heaviest amount of maintenance being needed, because it's meant to collect all that stuff, but it has to be cleaned out regularly so that it can still collect stuff the next time we get a storm event. So this is where I think a lot of the efforts are focused, because that's just where it all ends up. And
Specifically trash, you'll see a lot of trash there, and if there's trash, that means it's doing its job, to be really honest. It's easier to pick trash out of that facility than it is to go pick it out of all the plants within the system. So the idea is that you pull it at that point. And a lot of times I think as we move through the maintenance, you know, it might be shoveling some dirt and sediment out of that pre-treatment area regularly. So moving on, above grade barriers, you'll see in the KC Water, they've added some like wood bollards to represent, saying this is a green infrastructure system. There's many different things. We use curb and gutters, we use specialty bollards, these right here that you'll see very common in their system. But basically it's something that says this is specifically meant to be a native stormwater facility. And that will control public from getting in there. It will also help you on a maintenance side of knowing where you should, you know, kind of control that maintenance. It'll give you a line, is the idea. But perception is when you start to see these native plants growing, people are like, why aren't they cutting it down? Well, there's a sign there that says why they're not cutting it down, because we need that to be that way. So it's very important, but you'll see many different things from fencing to curbs and signs. So I mentioned earlier outlets. Again, multiple types of outlets. Some of the most common are going to be the one on the left there, the overflow riser. You'll see that quite a bit. I will say it's always going to be above the basin. That's the idea. And it's typically about 6 inches above that basin. We usually want 6 inches of water in there. Now we want that water to dissipate within 24 to 48 hours. If we don't, we get die-off of our plant. So the idea is that in 48 hours, we get that water to infiltrate down. So along with this, we have other outlets that might be underground. But this is kind of that overflow, big rain event. It's got somewhere to go when we get that hard rain and that big rain. You can see on that right picture that that's full of water at that point in time. And it's kind of holding that water, which is what we want. We just don't want it to hold for too long or it kills everything. So that's where it becomes really important. I mentioned earlier the soil and aggregate media underneath. This is really, really, really important to a functioning system. Keeping it clean, keeping sediment that we don't want any clay sediments out of it, very important. I talked a little bit about the choker course. So a lot of times we have an engineered soil media that's mainly to grow plants in, and then below that we have a sand layer of some kind. That's what we call the choker course. That's filtering that system, first step, and then below that we might have aggregate, and we may even have some pipes within that system. So we're trying to filter that water as it moves through. And so it's kind of important to, when you see something that doesn't look right and it's holding water back, that's when we'll need to know, and we can kind of determine what the issues are. Landscaping, obviously, of a green stormwater infrastructure, because landscaping is pretty important. This is a tough part, guys, and we're going to get in deep discussion here because there's going to be a lot of plants in here you may not know. Our job is to help train you and teach you as you start moving through maintenance. And hopefully everybody is landscape experts of native plant material when we get done through this process. You're not going to know it right off the bat. We ask that you ask questions. We have all these people up here that, except for me, that are experts in landscaping. And Just so you guys know, Vireo is a company that does design some of these. There might be a couple of these that we actually designed. So there are experts here to ask questions. Please don't hesitate. There's good plants, and then there's the bad plants and weeds. And we get a lot of weeds here in our city. We are going to go through kind of how you take care of those. There's times that you want to cut them back. There's times that you want to just spray them. There's times you may want to cut them back partially and then spray them. There's control. We can't, wide spray a whole basin or we kill all of our good plants. And sometimes these things start to look like I don't know what's good and what's bad. And we're going to help you through that, hopefully, through the process.
All right, so the appearance and function of these facilities are directly impacted by your regular maintenance activities. So all of the sites are required to meet contractual service levels of performance, which I will get into in a little bit. And your maintenance needs, every site is unique, every site is different. So your maintenance activities will vary based on the site and weather conditions. And then I would also encourage you all to, if you're not familiar with it, the city's Green Infrastructure Manual, it's on the city's website, to get on there and download that and review it. It has a lot of great detail. It's a great reference.
That's going to help you understand what went into it to design it.
Yeah.
And then that helps you understand what you need to do to maintain it, is basically why we mentioned that.
Yep.
Yeah, the GSI, the establishment and maintenance section is what makes up part of your scope of services. So that defines all of the activities in more detail with some photos too. So it can serve as a great resource, but a lot of the content here is directly from that.
So this is a quick diagram of the process. So in the beginning, you will have access to as-built landscape plans. Some of these sites do have operations and maintenance plans, which you can reference. So that includes more detail about the different plants that are on the site and different typical maintenance frequencies. So when you're on site, every time you're on site, you will be doing a site inspection report, and you will be using the KC Water Green Maintenance Field Map, which Elizabeth will talk about here in a second.
It's an application
Yeah.
on your phone.
It's through ArcGIS, but we'll get into that. So there are two types of maintenance activities that you will be performing, and those fall under preventative and corrective actions. So the preventative actions are the typical activities that are under your contract. That includes like sediment and weed removal. And these should be happening at regular planned intervals. Corrective actions are those items that kind of fall outside your maintenance contract, and it's when we see major sediment issues or major erosion issues or large areas of dead plants. So those would be identified as corrective actions. So then you would notify me, and then we can work through work order to take care of those.
Yeah, so that's the allowance authorization for those of you who've seen the contract. That's what that bucket of money is for. So most of your work should fall under the routine maintenance tasks. That's what you're working through regularly. But there will come times where there's a larger issue at hand that's outside of your scope, and that's what that allowance money is for. So that's what we want you guys to make us aware of. So one, we know there's a lot of these sites that need plant replacements. We know that, and that's a big part of what that allowance is for. But there's also improvements that can be made at these sites. So these have been built over the last 12, 14 years or so, and we are learning new things about how green infrastructure can function better every single time we do it. So there's modifications that we could make to a lot of these sites that I think could make maintenance easier in the long run. And that's kind of feedback we're looking for from you and your crews as you guys go out there. When you see a recurring issue that you guys are having to do that's out of the normal from the other sites, and you've got ideas on how to remediate that, that's what we want to hear about, and that's what we could potentially use those allowance funds to do, make all of our lives easier in the long run.
All right, so a properly functioning facility will allow water to flow through it. Will generally have thriving vegetation, minimal weeds, and the vegetation is thriving, so the roots are uptaking, nutrients, and improving water quality and decreasing your stormwater-related issues. If you see standing water, as Lauren said, in a bioretention basin for more than 48 hours, make sure to report that in the app and then also notify me. An improperly functioning facility, you're going to see standing water, you're going to see large bare areas that have probably been overtaken by weeds, and it's just not functioning. Large erosion areas, this picture, you can see there's a huge area where there's an erosion rail starting to form, and now there's standing water, and there's a large area of weeds that have taken over. So I'm going to talk about this. These are the service levels of performance standards I'm going to go through. So that includes ratings for litter, appearance, and function. So I'm going to start with talking about litter. So these sites are in low-lying areas, so they tend to collect a lot of trash and debris. Whoops, sorry. So when you're on site, so this is part of the inspection. So there will be an item that asks you to rate the litter that you see on the site. So there's 4 different categories: no litter, slightly littered, may take a few people to pick it up; littered, it might take a large group of people; and extremely littered, you may have to use special equipment. So you give a rating of 1, 2, 3, or 4 on the site.
And in
So
general, with this program, we're trying to keep everything like a 2 or lower. So once you're done, we should have no litter or slightly littered, and you should be doing it frequently enough that we can maintain it that way. So that's the goal that we're going for.
So we're going to practice giving a rating. So this is a basin at Rachel Murado. How would you rate this? No litter, slightly littered, littered, or extremely littered?
We hear 1s and 2s for the most part.
Yeah. I would probably give this number 1 of no litter.
And when we say litter, obviously it's just trash and paper and cups and dumping and
Yeah.
all of those things.
Yeah. Next is the appearance index. So you'll be evaluating the overall health and appearance of the vegetation to determine kind of what maintenance activities you might need to perform. Any of the dead or diseased vegetation that might need to be replaced will need to be under a different maintenance actions. So the appearance index, excellent is healthy vegetation, no weed species present; good, mostly healthy vegetation. There's a few weeds; moderate, mostly healthy, but it's kind of neglected and maybe there needs some pruning to clean up the edges. There's lots of weedy species. And then poor is just very unhealthy, full of weeds, needs a lot of maintenance. So what would you rate this same site based on the looking at the vegetation health?
It's tricky.
I
That's
know,
a
this
hard-
can be
That's
a
a
little
tricky
subjective.
one.
It can be subjective.
I would do 3 just because that spot necessarily just grows the most. That exact spot right there.
Any other 3s?
Yeah, bring it back.
Yep,
I would definitely say a 3.
Yep.
it's a 3. It's hard
And
to
it's
tell.
hard, and that's
It's-
partly why we're doing this, and you guys will understand. This,
It's weeds.
that's weeds.
Yeah, just because it's green doesn't mean
I mean, it
it's-
looks different, right? I mean, you can kind of tell, this area's a whole lot better on this, I would say. But-
And a lot of the
Tricky,
sites that
tricky.
you guys are working on are gonna have heavy weed cover. Some of those have had a gap in maintenance coverage, so some of them are worse for wear than others. So I think the biggest thing as we get started in this program is to understand where all the sites are at. We don't wanna just go and remove all of the weeds right off the bat, especially if that's the only vegetation that's out there, cause at least it's holding all of the soil in place. But we do wanna start making a plan for, okay, how do we start to eliminate these weeds and replace with good plants?
It-
Yeah, in this case, we asked the maintenance contractor to just kind of keep the weedy area kind of cut low and look clean, just so we could have soil coverage until we can come back in and do some replacements.
I will say this is a good time to tell you that just because you see this in, say, a site, doesn't necessarily mean there's not good stuff in there. It's just, that's where we're gonna hopefully teach you all how to look for those specific species, because some of those might be good, there might be one or two or here or there, and that's when we talk about just going in there and spraying it, roundupping it and killing it is not what we want to do, because that's actually hurting. But I'm not saying on this one that was the case, but it's just always keep that in mind. The other thing that I will say here is it depends on the time of the year when you take these pictures or you look at them. You'll see a big change from, obviously winter months, but even spring, cool season months into summer. A lot of what you're gonna see in these facilities, vegetation-wise, is gonna be thriving in the summer. Our weeds are thriving in the spring, so we have to really kind of control that. Elizabeth has gone to sites, I want you guys to hear this, and said, oh my gosh, it's not doing real well, right? And it was early spring. Literally 3 weeks later, she comes back in the office and says, it's looking fantastic.
Yeah.
Because those plants, a lot of these summer-loving plants are not even, you can't even see them. They're literally still just root systems. So we have to be real careful with when we do things. And it's really important to understand that. And we'll hopefully help you through all that.
So the last rating is regarding function. So this looks at how water's flowing through the GSI. So you're looking for evidence of erosion or bare spots of the soil. And significant, this is where you look for sediment buildup in the soil. So this includes excellent, you don't see any erosion, good, some erosion, and some flow obstructions due to sediment, moderate level of erosion, and a significant buildup you're starting to see a significant buildup of that sediment, and then poor, a lot of erosion issues, a lot of sediment, so.
You'll start to see when you're out there, the sediment, it forms like a crust on top of the soil, and exactly, and that's really important to note, because that's gonna impede the spread of plants and healthy plant growth.
And letting water soak into it, so that this is what we need to get off of the surface, whether
And
it's
I think
shoveling it out.
most
or-
of the sites are gonna have quite a bit of this if they haven't been maintained.
Yeah. So, what would you rate the function of this?
See a lot of fours.
I heard a 4.
I agree.
We gave you an easy one on this one.
This is kind of the extreme case. So.
Yeah, you can actually see the cracking of the crust here of this sediment that got loaded into this. Yes?
Will you guys go through the best ways to remove stuff like that?
Yeah.
It's kind of dependent on
The site?
site, location, can you get to it? Sometimes it's a manual, just a shoveling and raking.
Shoveling
and
it
then
out a
off.
lot of times,
Sometimes we can get a little bit larger equipment in there, but that's more rare, I would say. But it's kind of we would work with each of you to kind of figure that out. The more heavy equipment we get in there, the worse, sometimes we destroy everything else.
To what extent is getting it, like, if you were to get that back to excellent, what would that be?
Well, this one's a tough one. I guess I can let somebody else
Yeah.
answer, but
I mean-
this is removal of sediment, but we're loss of plants here. We have loss of plant life, right? So this is one of those corrective measures where we may have to go in and say, we replant that, and then that's an additional, one of those work orders to actually go in and replant
But
that.
on the ones where there's just a bunch of riprap as like a desiccation or a forebay, those are the ones that when we were looking at, I was kind of curious to what, like, you know, you can go all the way down and pull everything out, but back in, or do you
Yeah.
just try to get like, how much soil are you trying to get out?
A lot of times I would say it's and I don't know if these are considered corrective, like vacuuming, and
No,
those
that's
kinds
not
of
corrective.
things.
That would be regular maintenance, is trying to like shovel and vacuum it out. Some of them are beyond that, I would say, and that's what we definitely want to work with you on. Roger, do you have any kind of anecdotal ways that you've seen these cleaned out that you like better than others? My favorite was the Green Stewards one.
We're making great strides at perfecting these forebays, making them easier to clean out. And I'm of the opinion that riprap is really hard to clean out.
Yeah.
Once it gets filled up. So we're going with flat surfaces. It seems to be working out with the weir around it. So it's easy to shovel out, but we need to get a back truck in there, back it out. But it seems like it's working very good for us right now. So hopefully, what we're doing now, we're moving forward with that, but we can also start retrofitting it at some point to get these things in a more maintenance
Friendly,
fashion.
yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons we like some of the proprietary of that round inlet that I was showing you, because it actually drops it in the base of it and it fills up and then spreads out. So you literally just pop that top and
Yeah, but a
pull
lot of
this
the
up
sites
out,
that we
but-
have right now have the rock in
Yeah,
there. So
yeah,
I'd say
they do.
the method is removing the rock, cleaning the rock off. And putting
Sometimes it gets to the point where you have to pull a rock out. And we just kind of work with you on what that is.
And I would say that splash pad's kind of the extreme case that we've seen right now. And that's just years of not doing anything to it, so it's just been accumulating.
And that one it's hard to access some of
Yeah.
these. I mean, it really is gonna be like a wheelbarrow and a shovel, because you're not gonna be able to get heavy equipment down in these bases without harming the plants or compacting the soil, which we really wanna avoid.
Yeah, I'd say that's the biggest thing is we don't want to be hurting the site or other parts of the site while we're trying to clean out one part of the site, which seems intuitive, but it can be really easy to do because you're working in soils that are not compacted and not meant to be compacted. So you drive equipment over that and you've rutted out the whole thing, killed the plants pretty much immediately. So it's always just being really cognizant of your methods and careful of your methods so that you're not hurting or disturbing other areas of the site.
So I'm just gonna real quickly tag on to Roger. I think he has a great point there. We've learned what to put in and what not to put in. But I will say this, if that riprap area looks like that, it's actually doing its job, right? Because it's not in the system itself. The problem is it's hard to keep it clean. So that's kind of where I'll end.
Sediment's easy to clean out when you're doing it regularly because it's loose, but if you don't do it regularly, it's gonna turn to pretty much concrete and it's harder to get out. So that's kind of the importance of let's do sediment removal, every time that we're out there so that it doesn't get like that. But know that a lot of the sites are like that and that's more of a bigger remedial measure that we're gonna need to take to get it initially clean. And then you're picking up more from like a routine maintenance standpoint. And we know that, we do.
So I'm gonna go through kind of the typical inspection and maintenance tasks you'll be performing. I'll note that each of these sites is unique, so there's no detailed maintenance schedule that applies to every site. So it's just kind of see what's happening on site. You might have to adjust your maintenance schedule on a monthly basis based on what you're seeing.
And we'll be looking to you guys to set what that regular maintenance schedule is, or what your intended maintenance schedule is, and then we can adjust as we need to, just based on the needs of that site. But at the end of the day, you'll know these sites better than anyone else because you'll be out there regularly seeing them. So that's kind of the partnership we're trying to establish with you and your crews to keep an understanding of how they're working and what needs to be done where.
And I'll also remind you that when you're on site, just be aware of your surroundings, always wear your safety vest. If you're gonna be in the street for any reason, make sure you are protecting yourself with cones or Oops, sorry. Just be safe. If you are doing any trimming or mowing, make sure there aren't any pedestrians or visitors nearby to the site. So trash and debris removal, this is probably something you'll be doing the most frequently. These sites collect a lot of trash. Right now, I think the maintenance contractor's out there weekly, and they're doing a really good job of keeping the trash up. And this is important because that's probably the most visible eyesore to the sites. So keeping the trash picked up helps keep these sites look nice for the community.
It also can clog, as you see in that picture, you know, you're not, if there's enough trash and debris, then they're not gonna function well, the water will bypass.
Yep.
Yeah, on the left-hand side, you can see a lot of the, I guess, common GSI components that tend to collect or the trash can impede. So inlets, you'll see trash around the inlets a lot of the times, and those energy dissipation, those pre-treatment areas. Along the above-grade barriers, so like curb lines, that's where trash can become a problem because they can, again, kind of block flow that gets into the inlet. And then obviously on the surface of the soil and aggregate median within the landscaping is where it'll get hung up. But what I don't want you to forget is the outlet structures, because a lot of the trash does float. So eventually if these fill up, they will make their way into or near the outlet structures. So most of those outlet structures have a little filter bag in them. You can just lift the grate right off and clean up that filter bag. So just something to kind of be aware of too. Just check them.
And if you see any large dumped items on the site, like furniture, tires, just report that to me. That's not gonna be your responsibility to remove that. Sediment removal, as we spoke about earlier, is super important to do this very regularly, because if you don't do it, then it becomes a huge problem for the site. So you can use a shovel to remove sediment. But when you're doing this, also keep in mind that you need to replace the materials that may have, soil materials or mulch materials that may have been removed. And as Lauren said, sometimes there's these filter bags in the inlet and outlet pretreatment structures that you need to check.
Yeah, that's that middle picture. That's what the filter bag looks like in a lot of those.
Make sure that the stormwater flow path is clear. You know, for example, this shows a street with a bunch of leaf litter. So taking a broom and clearing that stormwater, that path. And then also it can collect in curb cuts. So clearing those out regularly. Always, every time you're on site, inspect for standing water. Once again, if you see standing water that's been there for a while, please report it to us. And also, if there is standing water, inspect for mosquito larvae. This is something you'll see frequently, erosion and repairing erosion and material settlement. So when the water's flowing through the basin, sometimes it'll create an erosion rill or gully through the site. And so it's important to take care of those early on, because they will become even larger issues down the road if we don't take care of those, if you see that happening. So the bottom image is an excessive erosion failure, and that is something you are not responsible for, but to notify us if you see those extreme erosion.
But the top shows more, I think, of a typical one that we
Yeah.
would want your crews to address. So if it's, the kind of rule of thumb is if there's more than 6 inches of material that's lost, we want you guys to address that. If it's greater than that, or if it's obviously causing a bigger structural failure or concern, that's something just relay back to us and we can address that, again, with that allowance fund.
And we can work with you on site if you see an area of how to repair that. Typically, you're gonna rake the soil back into place.
Yeah, so I'm gonna jump in here and say this is where we have to work as a team, and the idea here is a lot of times you're our eyes on the site more often than we are. We will be going out there, but you guys are gonna be out there a lot more. So understand that sometimes when we design systems like this, they don't always work the way they were designed. I mean, it is water, it is nature, so we have to understand that things move and change. So sometimes, you know, it's like when we see a reel, it's like, well, maybe we shouldn't, or there shouldn't have been plants there. It's just not working. We'll come in and say, okay, then let's put in some rock in there and just move on with it. You know, there's changes that we can make, and you guys are an important part of seeing that and helping us with those changes. Now, those changes, if it's that aggressive, are not a part of your contract, but you let us know, and then it can be added to.
Yeah, we don't want
So-
you to have to repair the same reel every week, all summer long.
Yeah,
You know, if you're seeing
It's
that,
not smart.
then we need to change the design.
Also, when you're on site, if you see any evidence of like curbs broken or loose inlet structures, that is not your responsibility to fix that, but make sure you report it so we can have a record of it and make sure it gets fixed.
Yeah, damage happens. A lot of these
Yeah.
are on the roadside. Bollards get hit, so just let us know so we can get someone out there to fix it. Make sure it's not a safety issue.
So you'll be inspecting the health and appearance of the vegetation every site visit, to help you identify areas of, that need weed removal, or areas requiring vegetation replacement, or areas you're starting to see disease. I know one area we saw recently, there's sumac and there's wilt starting to happen there, so just being aware of that before that gets out of control. So going into pest and disease control, so report anything that you see. Any chemical controls that are gonna be used, you need to be a Missouri State certified applicator. And then notify me before you're gonna be doing any kind of chemical application to anything. So I have to know before you do that and approve it. Pruning plants, so if you see plants that are kind of overhanging some of the sidewalks, make sure we're keeping clean edges. You can prune plants using hand pruning shears. For all the perennials and grasses, we want those pruned back in early March. We like to keep the grasses foliage over the fall and winter months. So only cut those back in early March.
One critical thing I'll note here is we make sure that we're not cutting the grass like right to the ground. It's okay to leave 3 to 6 inches of foliage on that crown. Cutting those grasses right to the ground can really kind of damage that crown and then start to weaken the plant, and then it'll decline over the following years. So leaving, like this photo shows here, leaving some of that clump there is perfectly fine.
And I will note that we've been seeing shrubs getting cut back to the ground. So be very careful when you're pruning those. You should only be pruning like dead or dying branches. And prune them to maintain their natural form. Don't prune them into nice formal bald forms. And never use a string line trimmer to mow or prune plants.
I think that's kind of a lesson learned for us. Unfortunately, we've learned more than once is when we tend to have more powered equipment that go in here. That's when we have something happen where we wipe out all the plants because it was misused or overused. So that's just something we're going to be really sensitive to, the methods that you guys are using, and making sure that we don't do something that we can't undo later on. We don't want to over prune or kill off the plants.
And we can have available kind of a timing of these things and when it's best. I don't think we have that right now, but we're seeing things getting pruned to the ground in, mid-July, and obviously that's not what we should be doing. So we need to be careful about those kinds of things.
Yeah, generally, you don't want to be cutting things back when we're in our hottest months, right? Because that's making that plant really weak. You want to keep it longer during those months.
So when you're on site and doing your inspections, we'll get into it, there's a category where you can identify like kind of the plant coverage percentage of your basin. So this is a corrective action that will fall outside of your maintenance activities, but we need to know for future plant replacements what's going on.
Yeah, this helps us start to identify where we need to plan for replacement plants, because realistically, we don't have enough money to replace all the plants we need in every single basin, but we want to start identifying where those bigger problem areas are, or where there's bigger gaps, so that we can start to fill those in. And that's again what a big chunk of that allowance fund is intended for, is replacement plants where we know we've got a lot of die-off. But by you guys recording that in the app as you're out there, that helps us to kind of document those hot spots, those bigger zones. So that's an important piece for us.
So one of your most important tasks will be controlling weeds on site, and we're gonna get into kind of the identification of some of the common weeds later. But just making sure you're keeping them under control. If you don't, they're gonna compete with the desirable plants, and they're just gonna take over the site.
And I will say a lot of native plants look like weeds. So that's where it gets difficult, but again, we're gonna kind of step through that.
And then also as a preventative measure, early in the spring, you can also apply pre-emergent granules.
Yes.
For applying pre-emergence, are we preventing propagation by these plants naturally?
I think that would be on a case-by-case basis in these basins, because yeah, we're gonna have some plants out there that it's native plants that we're gonna seed and move around, and that's definitely desirable. So I wouldn't say it's a blanket statement that we're applying the pre-emergent. It's gonna be evaluating each site each year, understanding if it could be a useful tool.
Yeah, we've had at least one or two that we've had to do it, or we wanted to do it. But yeah. That's what's kind of interesting here, is we're kind of just talking maintenance and training and stuff, and we're not talking about everybody's individual site. So we'll be meeting with each company and kind of, setting out what their specific sites are and what we believe it's going to take up front. And then hopefully we can kind of stay in front of it. I think if Roger was going to say anything today big, is stay in front of maintenance, is what we've learned, through that. I mean, you let these things go 6 months, and next thing you know, it takes you 3 months to get back to where you were.
At least.
At least. Or another 6 months.
It could be
to
another
get back.
growing season, full growing
Yeah,
season.
so the idea is to be proactive on all this stuff.
And if you're using chemical herbicides for weed control, always make sure you're notifying me before you're applying those to get approval. Don't go out there and just broadcast spray a large area. If there's desirable plants nearby, be very careful. We don't want to kill off good vegetation. And we've seen some herbicide die-off recently, so plant die-off from it, chemicals. And then never mow or use a string line trimmer to manage weeds. If you see a large area of weeds, and this picture on the left, you can see there's nice tick seed growing and some beneficial plants. There are some weeds in there, but then when you come in there with this string line trimmer, you're taking out a lot of those beneficial plants. So if you feel like the area of weeds is so large you need to use that, you need to get my approval and meet with me on site, and we can talk about it. But we just don't want this.
This was done in July.
Yeah, done in July during the hot
Yeah,
months,
so we may have lost a lot of those beneficial plants. Like, yes, it cut down the weeds, but now, there's nothing to outcompete the weeds. So we've turned a small problem into a big problem.
Yeah. And then some of the sites.
Real
yeah.
quick, that's a good point. I just kind of want to reiterate that.
Yeah.
The best control of weeds is healthy plants, literally in these systems. And the healthier the plants, the more they spread. Once we get them to a point where they're so healthy plant-wise, your weed population will diminish. And that's a really good point to make. That's kind of why we kind of stress the staying on top of it, because the healthier we can keep them, the less weeds we're going to get that next growing season.
So some of the sites have some turf areas that will need to be mowed. Just be very careful that you know where the edge of the bioretention basin or the GSI facility is. If you're not sure where that edge is, you can contact us and we can help you figure that out. And then don't mow within the GSI footprint, any of the native vegetation.
And I think
Yeah, other
most of
thing
these
to
have
note-
a demarc, right?
Yeah.
They should, yeah.
They should.
Yeah, some of the boundaries are more obvious than others, like I think the picture that we had on the last one was a pretty obvious mow curve. Some are, I'd say, less obvious than that. But in general, most of them do have some sort of demarcation. The one thing to note with the mowing is make sure that you're taking the grass clippings with you. Don't leave those there, they'll end up in the basin and that's gonna be a bigger mess to clean up later, so make sure that those are taken with you.
And then some of the sites are mulched. There are some areas that are mulched. Not all of them are. We're trying to move away from using mulch. But if you do need to refresh the mulch, that's just a double ground hardwood mulch. And just when you're mulching, please don't pile it up on the trunks of trees. We want to keep that away from the base of the trunks and the plants.
Yes.
I was just curious why you guys said you were moving away from mulch.
Well, just because we're trying to, it moves fast, it floats, it washes away, and, just to have to keep.
It's different
Keep
than a
doing it.
traditional landscape where, you've got your mulch and it stays in place. Like, we see it migrate a lot and it can clog the overflow.
It's more of a maintenance problem than it is help. But with that being said, we
There's-
gotta get plant growth, so we don't need mulch,
And there's
right?
some areas that we will continue to mulch,
Yeah.
and we do continue to mulch. In general, it's expensive though, so for the city to go be mulching these beds year over year, that costs a lot of money. When ideally these systems are supposed to be becoming more sustainable, stronger, long-term, so we would like to replace mulch with plants, so the plants are holding all the soil in place and we're not relying on mulch to do that. But that being said, we have some areas that are more kind of ornamental that will still have mulch around them.
So do they have access to the specifications for things like this, materials of what's allowed, right?
Yep, that's all in the GSI manual.
Okay. Because like dyed mulch, colored mulch is no. So just things like that, double ground, and if you need us to approve it, we'll approve it. But if you go through the GSI manual, it's gonna be stated that way. It's gonna be in there when it is occurring. Because we have seen colored mulch go out there.
I'm just gonna pause a minute and see if you guys had any questions on the tasks.
Do we want
Do
a
a
quick break?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
a break would be good. I
Quick
think-
break.
Yeah, the key thing is, a lot of the tasks, it's not novel, it's things that you guys are probably doing elsewhere, it just might be done a little bit differently, or with a little bit more consideration within the green areas. So I know a lot of this is probably review for many of you, but we're trying to relay some of the lessons learned, the hard lessons learned that we've had along the way. So happy to hear feedback as well on any issues that you guys have seen that we don't hit on.
Yeah, and I will tag on to that with, it was interesting, we were working on a project, and I don't know that any of them are just like tree boxes on any of these sites. I actually have not looked at all the sites recently.
We've got one, Wabash is one.
So we had, there's a good one. So we have these trees, and they're in a basically a rock basin that's off the side of the road, right? And it takes water on. Well, it was being constructed. It was something that we had designed. It was part of the system. And the contractor said to me, "You sure are spending a lot of money for a tree." And I said, "Well, what you don't understand is the literally 6 foot of rock underneath that thing with the pipes and the curb that's bringing the water into it is really what that facility was about. The tree was just happy to be there, right? And that's kind of, and the tree helps us filter the water. It helps us, clean the system. Trees love these things because there actually is water. Our street trees that are just set above curb don't get any water. So it's all a kind of a happy system if we can keep it there. But it was just an interesting thing. Just always remember, these are stormwater facilities that have plants in them to help them thrive and do their job. So that's critical to understand. These aren't just planting beds, right? Hopefully that's clear. I say take a break. I think we're going to jump into the app, right?
Yes.
So big overall description of the app and even kind of where it's at and how we download it and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, as far as the app, Lauren, you can jump in here. It has just over the first maintenance round, it changed quite a bit. We were learning things. It wasn't working quite like we wanted. We adjusted, we changed. So things are evolving in it, but I think we've got it pretty strong now.
Yeah, so the important thing to note about the app is this is going to serve as your documentation with your pay application. So hopefully this makes it really easy on the paperwork side of things later, because you're just going out there and you're entering the work you're doing in the field and taking pictures, and the rest of it is automated. So it's going to automate reports that show all the work that was done at each site that you're at on the back end that you can just attach to your pay application for payments. So that's kind of the idea. We were trying to make it easier in the field and easier on the paperwork side of things, but also have the good backup documentation of photos to document the work that you're doing, and then the city knows the work that you're doing as well.
All right, so the app is Field Maps, and we'll talk a little bit about that, I think, on the next slide. But every single time you visit a site, we need all of the activities recorded through this app. So that's not just taking pictures on your phone. The pictures need to be through the Field Maps app. And like Lauren said, it documents your work completed. It also tracks long-term conditions. So if you're seeing a problem every time you're out on site and you're documenting that, that helps us know what we need to do on our end to help address those issues that you're seeing. It also will help you adjust the frequency of the maintenance. Like we said, each site that you have is going to be unique and will need different things. Some sites fill with trash super frequently. Some almost never have litter, but you're going to have a lot of weeds. And so just tracking that and the activities that you're needing to do each time you visit a site will help you determine the frequency of that. And just also showing that you're compliant with the level of performance standards. One thing I think I'll say is we have an understanding that when you're first out at these sites that they are not going to meet that in terms of maybe function. Definitely plant cover. We understand there's no way there's going to be 90% plant cover on the majority of these sites. And we're not going to ding you for that. What we're looking for is that over time we are improving this and we're going to start addressing those issues and retrofitting those plants. So don't think that just because it's like, oh, this has, 40% bare area, that's gonna hurt us. Like, we understand that that's what you're gonna see when you start out at these sites. So the map is called Field Maps. It's produced by ArcGIS. So you'll get it from an app store. And then you'll have a login and password. And so you can decide if it's like a company thing or if you have a couple people that are in charge of using this app.
You will have to have at least one enterprise account, they call it. So each company is going to need to have their own account through Esri, and then you can add users to that account. So that's just kind of something important to note. You guys will need to have your account set up and those logins set up going into the program so that we can add you to the Field Maps and you can use the application.
Okay. this is a zoomed in picture of a site, yeah.
Can you go back to it so I can write down
Oh, sure, yeah.
You guys can take a picture if you want.
You can
I'll get
also
out of the way.
search it if you open, like if you have a Google Play or Apple, you can just search for field maps and it'll pull it up where you can download that.
But I do encourage all the owners to go in and look at the different account packages that they have, and decide what's the best fit for your company.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest statement is encourage
Yeah.
upper management ownership needs to kind of look at what the right route is as far as purchasing and then distributing throughout the different.
Because they have
Group.
different license options and things like that.
And I think that was, I'm assuming that was already looked at, as a part of the process of contract.
We can share these slides with everyone too.
Yeah.
They'll be available, so you can, links and all of that stuff, you'll have access to afterward.
Okay, so when you open the app, you're not gonna see this right off, you're gonna see the City of Kansas City. There's a little button up in the corner that you can hit and it will take you to where you're standing. So that will help you once you're out on site. You're not gonna have to zoom around the map and try and find your site. You just hit that little, it's a little like target icon, hit that icon, boom, it's gonna take you to where you're at. This is what will show up. This is a pretty simple site. There's only 4 routes. You're gonna see the streets, kind of like an orientation as to where you're at. North will be up. Each little area is gonna be an individual route. And so when you select it, it's the footprint. Each has a unique identifier, like a unique number for every single one when you're out at your facility. So yeah, it will highlight what has been selected and it will be in blue. Common task across the entire site. You don't have to go to this granular level of each individual area. But if there's a specific issue, we want to know where it is on site. So we want you to be very specific. Like if you're seeing something that's going to be an extra activity, like we want that documented to that individual route. So there's going to be 2 different things that you can do. One is inspection only, and the other is logging your maintenance. So when you first get out on a site, an inspection report is going to document what you're finding when you get there. So that might be a good first activity. As soon as you get out on the site, kind of walk the site, document, like, here's how much litter there is, here's all the leaves, here's the erosion and the sediment in the forebay, and get pictures of those things and give it a rating. So this is what you're finding as is when you arrive on site, and that's inspection only. Something to know, to be aware of is Vireo, we are out every 2 weeks and we are doing inspection only reports. So we will visit your site, a team of people, you'll probably see us out there in our safety vest. We do inspection reports and we're just trying to kind of verify what you're seeing and verify that we're seeing maintenance be performed. So we are out there doing inspection only. Your companies will also be doing a maintenance visit. And so that's going to bring up different fields in the app than the inspection only. The inspection only will have the 4 categories and a place to put your name and attach photos, and you're going to give the ratings for those categories. The maintenance is a little more involved. So like I
So
said,
let's go back to the inspection only, just make sure everybody understands. So can you go back? And it might have to click through this. You can kind of see here in gray, litter,
It'll come back. Sorry.
you're fine.
it's an
Litter,
animation. It's the animation.
no, we're almost there. The litter index, appearance index, functionality index, that's what Ashley spoke to earlier, the 1 through 4. It should be a bang, 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 to be really honest, to go in and do that. When we get into maintenance, that's a whole different, there's a little bit more level of understanding and kind of what you need to do. But site inspection should be fairly intuitive at some point, pretty quick.
And we need these again every single visit. So Ashley can see what you're inputting and we have access to the pictures. And so it's really important that before you do anything, this happens every single time you're on site, there's an inspection. So the maintenance, you're documenting your before and your after. So the photo, you're gonna click the take photo, it will open the camera. The photos are stored within the field maps. They will not be on your individual camera. So if there's something you want on your own photo roll, you have to be outside of the app. These pictures are tied to the app. So we do want the name of who's inputting the information. The date is automatically filled in. So you'll select maintenance. So this is after the work is completed. So this is before you leave the site. You'll give the ratings again, and hopefully we're seeing some improvement. Like I said, on appearance, that may not be true, or even functionality. Some of these things are going to be over time that we're seeing improvement.
So real quickly, can we go back to the photo? I wanted to point out that you may, and this is kind of company generated, ownership generated within each company and what you guys want to do, but you might be where you might take 40 pictures out there because it's gonna just help you understand what's going on, but you may only take 4 or 5 within the app, right? I mean, that may be how that works, kind of how you're picking the right moments for the app, but you may take a whole lot more depending on what your superior might want, I guess.
Yeah.
And as we know, with pictures, more is better, so,
will
but I just
say-
wanted to make that statement.
I will say, if you try to input too many photos, it might crash the app, so
Yeah.
you have to be kind of selective.
Yeah, that's kind of why I'm
the
saying
sweet
that.
spot is about 4 to 5 photos.
Yeah, that's
and
kind of
you
why
can-
I'm saying that. You may not be able to document 100% what you as a company wants to document, so we can get those in another way for that maybe big corrective action that needs to happen, or if we need to discuss something and
Yeah, if you're,
that kind of thing.
yeah, go ahead.
You got, let's say your property has multiple locations on one area. Is each one having some dead on the map?
Yes.
And then each one, you gotta take a picture and do all that, each bed.
Yeah. And each site's different, so that site we were looking was 81st and Teresa, it has 4 individual routes to record. A site like here has like 20. So it's gonna be very site specific.
Well, so, and I guess the caveat there, because in general, we want you guys recording your maintenance on the overall route. So the route encompasses all of those footprints within that whole project area. So, like if we're using the campus, for example, like we've got fire retention basin out front here, we've got bioswales around the site. Those are all their own individual site footprints, but you're recording it on the route, which puts that all together. So you're doing one inspection or one maintenance report as you complete a task for the whole, like
Oh,
every
not
site
each
of those.
individual.
Not each.
Unless there's
Okay.
Unless there's a
issue
problem. So
or
like
a
if there's a
problem.
specific issue with one of the beds that you wanna document, that's when you can report it to the site.
The site
Yeah,
level.
So that we know.
individual
Click on the map
footprint.
site.
Yeah, so for
Yeah.
your regular routine, like what we wanna see kind of the summary of what you completed for the entire route, for the, like, that entire project area. But if there's an issue or a specific picture you wanna get, you can report that directly to the footprint itself. That's kind of the best way we found to use it, or to clean up the use on the back end. Regarding the pictures, you can take pictures on your phone and upload it to an inspection too, if you find that easier. That's a way to get around the crashing issue.
Yeah.
But then you may wanna delete the pictures afterwards if they're not taking up storage on your phone. That's kind of what we were trying to be sensitive to. Have you seen issues with that, with uploading it?
It sometimes will work, sometimes you need to wait until you're back with Wi-Fi
For it to attach it?
for it to attach the picture to the report. So I have had some trouble in the field, depending on the site.
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is to take it while you're out there. Just take it from the inspection itself. Then, again, it's not being stored on your phone, it's only going into the inspection.
example, like you're picking up trash. That's a good example of something it's site-wide. But like, say there's been some vandalism, you know, we want to know where on site that occurred. We're familiar with the sites, you know, we're probably gonna know, but, the other thing is that if there's something that you have a question about, we do see this, but it's also like Ashley is your contact person, that if there's something you get out on site and you're like, oh, I don't know what to do about this, we really want you to get in contact with Ashley, send her a photo, send her a message, let her know what's going on. We will see this, but it's much faster to contact her directly, and that's why she's there, to form that partnership with you all while you're out on site. So this is like the documentation, but if there's like a big issue that you're seeing, we want to know about that before you take corrective action. So this is just a checklist that you're doing, that is about the schedule of values. So it's just a yes or no. It's pretty simple.
So you may be removing trash every time you're out there, so that's a yes, but you may only be, you know, removing leaves like every so often. So like every time you're out there, you're checking, did I do this task? Did I do this task? Yes or no? And it goes through all of the tasks that are on your, yeah, like she mentioned, your schedule of values, so the pay application. So this feeds directly into your pay application on the back end of things.
I will say we tried to keep this honestly as simple as we could with the yes nos, because we know that that can be a headache trying to, you know, track everything. So I think it's pretty simple, to be honest.
Yeah.
You had a question, Lynn?
Yeah, so this, the description of digital maintenance, that where you put like some little notes if you had them?
Yep.
And
Yep.
that leads me to the second question, is this also available on, as like a desktop, if you want to write up something later on?
Yeah, so we've got this built into like a dashboard, so we can open that up to you guys to be able to see that too, so you see in real time kind of the, well, real time is the next day, it refreshes every single morning.
I guess you need to say if you do your site inspections and your maintenance work and then want to come back to the office and write information notes, can you access this without having to be like on your phone typing report notes?
You can't get back into your inspection after you submit it, right?
You can.
Okay.
You can.
And this is available as a, like on a web version?
The field map is only available from like your phone, but if there's something that you're wanting to write up a larger report about, I would say like that should go in an email
Gotcha.
anyway.
Okay.
So this is really intended to be like a quick thing documenting what you're doing in the field, you know, something clean and easy while you're out there, but there's, you can.
So, Lauren, those are good questions. Let us put together an answer to that and kind of get it out and some explanation on how you do that, because we do get into it from desktop. I think just a standard ARC login. I don't know if
It's gonna depend on what type of account you have.
that's where I was gonna head. It might be because we have a professional level account, you know, or whatever it is, that maybe is different.
Does it
So-
allow
Yeah.
photo markups?
No.
No, not with the
No. So that might be where you're taking one on your phone if you need to mark something up and send it to Ashley directly. Oh yeah, this is for the additional services, something that's outside of the regular maintenance contract. This documentation is really important, so make sure that if there is something that you're getting a picture of it and a short description.
Yes, this is intended exclusively for non-routine maintenance. So if you see something that needs to be done out there that's outside of your basic scope items, this is where you want to say yes and you want to describe what that is. And that will trigger us to start looking into putting together an allowance authorization where we would put more backup to it, put a price and everything to that. But this is kind of your first stop of, hey, this needs to happen out here, here's a photo of it, and here's kind of a general description of that, and then we should follow that up with a conversation.
Yeah, and then there's also a place to document the additional services within the maintenance. And then you can submit it. Like I said, you can get back in. I've gotten back into it. I've submitted one and then been like, oh, I missed something or I see something else. You can go back in and you can open it and make edits. So You'll clear out the value and then you can input a new value, if you need to edit a report while you're still out on site, or when you get back.
So you can submit it at the end of the day, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I've been able to submit like you said, I think it's the next morning.
That it refreshes on
That
the
it-
dashboard.
that it'll
Even
refresh.
if you change it after the fact, it'll just refresh the following morning.
The next day.
What you're submitting is editing kind of the data that feeds into it anyway. But we'll have the team, like the video team will meet with each contractor on site before we start and kind of walk through use of the app too. So this is just kind of to give you an intro or a snapshot of that, so you can download it and be ready to talk about it. But we'll go through in detail, like, submitting an inspection and like what the expectations are there, so that you guys can kind of go through the motions of it, because it's hard to do until you do it, right?
Yeah, it's easier to train on that when you have it in front of you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is just the precursor to it. I would also add that, when we get into this and you guys get fully under contract and we start moving forward, we're realizing that we go out there, so us trying to match up when you all are going to be out there is best, rather than it be more, you guys are doing maintenance and then we show up 3 days later as quote unquote inspectors, and then we're marking it, and then it gets to this discussion of, well, wait, I submitted this, and a lot of times it's easier for us if we're out there, if somebody can talk to us or has a question or something. So, and I know that's going to get a little bit crazy, at least for us. Because there's so many different sites and there's so many different companies. We're not gonna be able to match up every one, but I think if we're matching up with each company at least every once in a while, that will be very handy for us. So we'll kind of talk about, just kind of keeping us informed of scheduling, but that's kind of a separate meeting with each of you individually, not really a training type item that we're gonna do. Oh boy.
Okay, we're gonna talk about weed ID and removal. That's okay, so.
Please ask questions, you guys, on this. This is a detailed section.
Yeah, so the first thing we want to orient everyone to is, Ashley mentioned that you'll have access to as-built drawings for the basins, and that will include the planting plans that were part of the design. So I just want to kind of give a quick overview of how to interpret and read these plans. So first of all, you're actually going to have the actual planting plan itself, where it shows trees, shrubs, grasses, perennials, all the vegetation that was specified and planted on the site. And typically that plan will have little plant labels that have a code. In this case, PD here, and then you come over and reference to the plant schedule here on the right of the green, and you can see that that's actually a 9 bark, and that there was one planted there. So there'll be the code and then the quantity of plants to kind of help you understand how the intended plants lay out within the site. And then also the plans typically have a little legend. And that will note some more of the hardscape elements, such as boulders, gravel, curbs, and edging on the plan.
I think one thing to point out about these plans is that in most cases, it's been 3 years since these were installed, if not longer. And so while this may be how it was designed, it's very likely you may be out on site and you find that it's a completely different, plant that's out there.
Yeah, some of these plants, especially the native plants, the grasses, perennials, they will go to seed and they will move around, and that's good. We want that. So everything may not be exactly as you see in the plan here, but it's just a good reference to know what plant should be out there and the general location of each one.
And probably big picture is all of these are designed by several different firms within the city. So they're not always going to look exactly the same, but generally they're going to be the same. They're going to have plans, they're going to have labels, they're going to have a legend, and just kind of understanding that. And again, we'll meet with everybody, but going through and kind of understanding what was intended at that site is a good first step.
Okay, so why is weed removal important? First off is we have plenty of invasive weed species that get very aggressive, and they can start to crowd out and invade plantings, and that's a part of these facilities, and kind of really overrun and take over. That's not what we want. We want our native plants to establish themselves, thrive, because they are really the important components of these systems that help them function, both from infiltrating stormwater, but they also add beautify these facilities and make them attractive amenities for the city. So a few types of weeds here. Of course, we have the invasive weeds. Those are weeds that are super aggressive and can be harmful to native vegetation, crops, our ecosystems. And the Missouri Department of Conservation, they have a listing on their website of those weeds that are classified as invasive in the state. We have other undesirable weeds, like crabgrass comes to mind. That'd be a good example. Not considered invasive, but it can get into a planting bed and make it look a little bit unsightly. And as far as the different life cycle of these weeds, kind of want to go through this and make sure everyone has a good understanding. So first of all, we have annual weeds, and those are weeds that grow up in 1 year, set seed, and die. And since they only have a growing season of 1 year, they're very prolific in their seeding, and that's pretty much how they propagate. So those are the types of weeds we want to make sure that we're getting managed and cut back before they set seed. That's really critical. The biennials are plants that they may put growth out the first year, kind of a little clump, and then the next year they set up a stalk and they'll flower, and they only typically survive for 2 years. And again, that shorter life cycle, reseeding, producing seed is their main way of propagating. So again, controlling them by cutting off the plants and removing the seed head before it goes to seed is really critical. And then perennials are the last group. So that's a non-woody plant, and they will put down root systems and keep coming back year after year. And some of those can be the most difficult to manage because simply just cutting or digging those plants out is not enough. Herbicide application is an important component to their management, and we'll get into that here in a moment. So again, some of the weed control methods, the preventive measures, we already mentioned the pre-emergent granules. That's really going to be on a case-by-case basis. Again, some of these native plants, they put out seed. We want that seed to germinate each spring, and those plants moving around is okay. Of course, the pre-emergent granules would prohibit that. So those use of that product would probably be in a really extreme application where we're having some serious weed issues. Mechanical control, of course, is another good option. Using hand pruning shears or string line trimmer to cut those plants back at the soil level. And then, of course, chemical application is also another good tool, especially when it comes to some of those perennial weeds. So I mentioned number one there. I talked about before the flowering occurs. That's really for some of those annual weeds. We want to make sure that we're getting that plant cut back to the soil level and removing all the cuttings before it sets seed. We have issues on these sites where if you let those plants grow up and set seed, then you're going to be seeing that same plant again next year, and you're going to be having to go through the whole weed management process again. So as much as possible, if we can avoid having those plants set seed, that's really critical. For the perennial weed species, they're number two. Those, depending on if it's kind of a single clump or a large massing, will depend on how we want to handle that. A single clump, that plant can be just cut to the ground and then herbicide applied directly to the remaining kind of stems. If it's a larger area where broadcast spraying may be the most efficient, that can be the best option. Of course, that would make sure we're talking to the product manager, getting approval for that before proceeding. Which is, number 3 kind of mentions that. So.
And then if you cut anything back, make sure you remove all cuttings off-site. Don't leave anything behind.
And before I'm not gonna go, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not seeing manual.
Sorry, was
I
it?
missed that. Was there manual removal on there?
Yes,
There
yep.
was, okay.
Yep, yep. Cutting the plants back.
And like pulling it out of the ground.
So pulling's an option. I think it depends on the species, to whether or not, how well that plant's rooted. We do try to avoid pulling up the weeds as much as possible, because then you're creating soil disturbance and bringing more weed seeds to the surface, and could be exacerbating the problem. And it's a lot more labor intensive, of course. So manual cutting of the stems where possible is a quicker and more efficient method and can get the job done.
Like the perennial weeds.
Well-
Just because then it seems like the next step is going to herbicide, right?
Perennials will
And
be a
that's where I think
combination
we're running all
of
these
cutting and
problems
then
on the
herbicide.
sites, right? That's where all the problems are occurring. It's like people are over advocating with herbicides and killing beneficial things when they're.
It is, and I think that's where it's a case-by-case basis of whether or not it's 1 or 2 clumps of a perennial weed versus kind of a large massing,
Okay.
to understand how we're gonna deal with it.
Okay.
And if we can do a more targeted approach of herbicide and not just a blanket spray, that would be preferred as the best option. So, I'm not gonna try and go through and describe every weed here. You've got your little ID guide that can help with that. But I do want to go through and point out some of the few that we've kind of seen on some of the facilities that kind of pop up time and time again. But one thing I'll note, it's always good when you're on these sites is to kind of take an inventory of adjacent properties and what's around the facilities and what weeds you're seeing there. Because if you're seeing Johnson grass on the adjacent property, you're going to see Johnson grass in these facilities. So it's always a good idea to just kind of take a look around, and they'll give you an idea of what weeds you might see popping up in these facilities. Go to the next slide, Ashley. So on the left there, musk thistle. That's a pretty common one that we see popping up in these facilities. It's pretty easy to identify because it has very, very prickly leaves and a thick stem, and then of course when it blooms, the flowers are kind of nice little purplish, perfect round ball. But this is one that's a biennial. If you get kind of isolated little clumps of it, cutting it back and then applying herbicide directly to that foliage would be the preferred management method, just to make sure we're not, again, getting any of the a more targeted herbicide application to make sure we're not getting herbicide on any of the surrounding desirable plants. Next one.
Yeah, note the 6-foot flowering
Yeah,
stem.
it's a tall
I mean,
one.
this, here we go.
So both these here can end up being pretty common ones. Johnson grass, it's a big clumping perennial grass. You kind of see it gets a seed head on the right there. This is a perennial grass, so it will keep coming back year after year. This is one that, again, you want to evaluate kind of how it's occurring in the site. Single clumps here and there, again, cut it back to the ground and then do a direct herbicide application to those remaining stems, and always remove all the cuttings from the site.
Everybody know what Johnson grass is? Yeah,
It's a pretty common one.
yeah. Tough to control.
Go back one, actually. So the clover's an interesting one, because if we get kind of a wet and rainy spring or wet fall season, that's one that you can see really proliferate. And it can kind of spread and fill in real quickly and start to smother out some of the other desirable plants that we want. So this is one that perhaps maybe mowing or cutting to the ground would be the best option, just kind of knock it back. And then when we get to the heat of the summer, typically that one will recede a little bit as the other plants, the desirable plants start to grow up. That one, it's hard to use a herbicide on because it intermingles and gets in and around the plant so much. So really kind of mowing or cutting back is going to be the best option for that one. Crown vetch is one that a lot of DOTs use it for a while as seeding for erosion control. We actually even have one of our our GSI sites is on an old MoDOT facility, and there's definitely some ground veg on that site. But it's a perennial weed. Again, it gets pretty aggressive. And you kind of see the kind of pinkish white flower there. But this is one that trying to spot spray with herbicide to really knock it back is going to be the best method. With that rhizomatic root system, if you start to try and pull it out and it'll get all the roots, those little rhizomes will just repropagate and the plant will grow back again. Lespedeza and loose strife are both, again, really invasive weeds. I haven't seen those, either one of these a lot on either one of some of our basins we're working on. But again, these are both perennials. And if you would happen to spot these on a basin, this is one that you do want to get each one of these under control immediately because they are perennials. And they will spread quickly. Go to the next one, actually. Tree of Heaven. It's one of our woody plant material weeds. You may have seen this one around quite a bit. It grows super fast. Once you see like a little sprout coming up there, it can be twice that size in just a matter of weeks, and eventually forms to a large tree. This is one that if you spot the young seedlings, hand pulling those and getting those out I think is a good method. If it gets to be a larger tree that's getting to be 6-7 feet height, cutting it at the base and then applying herbicide directly to that stem would be the best method to make sure you kill that plant. The honeysuckles, of course, are always a big issue, especially the shrub honeysuckle. That's one that's pretty common in a lot of our woodland areas. And some of these basins may be adjacent to open woodland areas. So shrub honeysuckle moving in could definitely be an issue. The birds like to eat the berries and then redistribute the seeds. So this is one, of course, it's a perennial. So cutting the stems at the ground and directly and applying herbicide directly to those stems to make sure we kill the entire plant will be the preferred method.
It may take more than one application,
Yep.
or 4,
Yep.
to finally get it.
So yeah, crabgrass and foxtail. These are some of your annual weeds. They kind of grow in and around amongst the vegetation. I think just trying to make sure that you're controlling these by making sure that the plant doesn't set seed. So that's spot mowing, spot cutting back, or even if sometimes if it's after a rain and these plants can be easily removed by hand pulling. Those are all options.
We see a lot of that, both.
Same with ragweed. That's on the one on the right. That's one that's an annual, but it sets seed later in the year. So making sure that's again either hand cutting, string line trimming, mowing are all options to make sure we're cutting that plant at the base and not allowing it to set seed. You'll probably, since we have waters in these basins, cattail will be a common one that you see popping up. And again, if we can, it's a perennial, so making sure that we're cutting that one back and applying herbicide. But for the cattails, we want to make sure that we're applying herbicide that's rated for use near wetlands and water areas. But it's one that, again, once you spot it, we want to make sure that we're getting it under control. Because if we let that one go, it can quickly spread and kind of start to outcompete and overtake some of these facilities. And then nut sedge is a pretty common one too on the right. This is one that you definitely don't want to pull because all the little tubers in there, they'll just kind of resprout and it will just spread more. So I think, sedge hammer's one of the herbicides that's most effective on the nut sedge. Of course, we have our dandelions. This is one I don't know. I mean, we see in the facilities, and maybe not in the bottoms, but in surrounding lawn areas. you know, it's one of those, make sure, you know, if you're mowing and controlling it before it sets seed, I think that's acceptable. It's not one of our, it's more of an appearance thing, right, on this weed. We've had some facilities where, you know, you get large lawn areas with a lot of dandelions and it's perceived as very weedy. So just making sure we're kind of proactively mowing and keeping the dandelions from setting seed and returning each year. Go to the next one, actually. Japanese knotweed is one on the right that we've seen in some of the basins. It's also a perennial, and this is one, again, has the rhizomatic root system. So if you pull the weed or cut it back, it's just going to resprout and create more vegetative growth. So again, this is one to, depending on if it's kind of distinct little clumps or larger areas, will determine whether or not we can just cut back and do a direct herbicide application, or if we need to consider kind of a broadcast method if it's just a larger massing of the knotweed. But it's one that's really tough, again, because if you don't get all the roots or kill the root system, it's just going to resprout year after year. And pigweed and henbit are pretty common annuals we see. You know, really just kind of mowing or cutting these before they set seed is going to be the best method. Prickly lettuce on the right. This is one of the biennial weeds. We had one of our facilities a couple years ago. You know, the prickly lettuce came up the first year and it didn't get under control. So that fall year, when it grew up and set seed, it was everywhere. And then, so the time and maintenance that it took to go through and cut back and get rid of all the prickly lettuce, was probably about a week-long task. So this is one of those that if you see it in that first year, we want to make sure that we're getting it controlled and not allowing it to get to that point in that second year where it's sending up its flower stalks and setting seed. It's one that gets pretty tall, so it can kind of start to shade and outcompete some of the more desirable plant material. Okay, the last few slides here, we'll talk about native plant identification.
Before we move on, just want to make a statement. There are situations, and we've had it in some of our current maintenance times, where we've seen a large growth of weeds in an area, but literally it was the only thing there. I think we mentioned this earlier. We couldn't find any good plants, and so we decided to leave the weeds until we could do something better, right? Because the weeds, whatever type of weed it was, and I don't remember, it was not invasive enough that we were concerned about it. So we controlled it, we kept it mowed down.
Yeah. It was holding the soil.
It was holding the soil for erosion, and at least other things weren't coming up. So just as an FYI, I mean, that's where, when those big masses of weeds happen, you know, and we don't think there's anything else, we have a discussion about that and what's the right thing. But with that being said, I mean, obviously we don't want weeds, and again, I will reiterate, thriving, healthy plants is how we hold weeds back the best. Our goal is that you're not out there picking weeds and you're not cutting weeds, you're not treating weeds every time you go out there. At the end of the day, that would be the goal. That you're going by and you're going, 1, 1, 1, 1, let's go on, right? I mean, that's the idea that we're hopefully going to get to. We know that sometimes weeds can become an issue.
So 3 different types of plants that you're going to see are pretty common to these facilities. The first are our native grasses, and these are typically going to be warm season grasses. And what that means is that they need the soil temperature in the spring to get above 65 to 70 degrees before they start their active growth. So that means if you cut these plants back in late March, like Ashley mentioned, that little clump, you may not see a lot of green growth until early to mid-May before it starts to put up sprouts. And then when the weather really heats up, then those plants will start to really grow up. And on the flip side of that, when we get into September and temperature starts to cool down, they'll start to kind of decline in their growth and head back to their dormancy period. The sedges, our native sedges are kind of the opposite. These are cool season plants. So March, when soil temperatures get up to around 50 degrees, they'll start to have active growth. So you'll see a lot of green growth of these plants when you're starting to do your maintenance activities in the spring. These typically don't require the cutbacks like the native grasses do, unless there's a few sedge species that get some nice full clumps. But a lot of those, we don't really need to cut them back too much. They like to have that protected kind of crown over the winter. And cutting them back too close will actually make them decline over time, and we want to avoid that. The herbaceous perennials, so these are the non-woody plants that live typically more than 2 years. And some of these plants really focus on putting down their root systems the first years when they grow. So they may have kind of a small clump of above ground growth, but after 2 to 3 years, some of these plants, once they've established their root systems, you'll see more mature growth above ground. And again, these are plants that die back in the winter and require cutting back in the spring like the grasses.
Yeah, I would add to this, just understanding the sedges. We're missing sedges in a lot of our basins, and that might be something that we can go back in and put in. But as Brett would always say, those are our workhorse, especially in the early cool seasons to hold back our weeds. So if we can get sedges thriving, it's going to make life a lot better. So that's kind of a goal here is thriving ground covers, right? Sedges.
Yeah, we're looking to have a mix of these plants in the basins. So we have cool season, warm season grasses to really have a robust mix to help outcompete the weeds. Because again, these facilities have to function and they also need to look good. And when we get weed growth in these basins, the perception then, of course, is that green infrastructure is weedy, and that's not the case. These facilities can be very beautiful and attractive amenities for the city.
And just real quickly, we don't have a cross section to this, but just I'm not sure the knowledge base of native plants and why we even use them, but we have native species. Jump in here, you guys. We have native species that maybe are only 6 inches tall, but they grow a root system that is 10 to 12 feet deep. And the reason for the use of these plants is to drive those roots and spread those roots as much as possible, which gets our infiltration into these basins. So just what you see on the surface sometimes is very small compared to what's happening underground. Is that anything to add?
Okay, let's talk about some of the grasses here. So these are, I think all of these are pretty common. You'll see in the designs of the facilities. So on the left we have side oats grama. It's a native prairie grass. You probably won't see it too much in like the basin bottom, but on the surrounding side slopes, where it can tolerate kind of a little bit of wet to dry. And it's pretty easy to recognize because its name, side oats, the little stems, all the seed heads just hang off to one side. And it's just a super great grass, drought tolerant, really good at holding soil in place and good around the edges of the basin. On the right side is blue grama. This one's a little bit shorter. And this is one that it likes more dry than wet, so it would really be on the side slopes of these basins where they're going to experience more dry conditions. It's a shorter grass, about a 12-inch clump, and then the little seed heads almost look like eyelashes, and they rise above the grass, about 15 to 18 inches in height. And then each one of these you kind of see take on some nice fall color, with some kind of golden brown to tans in the winter.
Before you go on, just with the guide, each plant will have like an individual picture of the plant, kind of more of like what a massing of the plant would look like, a close-up of the seed head, and then the fall color. So the idea is that it'll help you identify it throughout the season. Because they change a lot.
Yep.
And honestly, we hope that these are planted in a way and maintained in a way that in the fall or in the winter they actually still look good, specifically fall and early spring. But that's why sometimes we might talk about getting rid of some growth. Sometimes we'll say let the growth go all the way through, and let's wait till the last moment to get rid of that, because it helps hold some appearance to the basins.
And it's habitat as well.
So the grass on the left, northern sea oats. Another one of our native grasses. It can be very useful because it has a little more of an aggressive seeding habit. You kind of see it has some very showy seed heads here that right now have kind of formed in our green, but will take on that tan color as we get into late fall and winter. But it's a useful plant in these conditions because it can tolerate some of the wet areas and tolerate some shade. It is one though that it will reseed fairly aggressively, which depending on the facility, that can be a benefit because it's helping to fill in the gaps and cover soil. But if it finds a condition it likes a lot, it could maybe start to crowd out some of the other native plants that we have that are desirable in the basin. So it's one that, if you're out doing your inspections and it's like, it's set in the plan there should be 12 river oats and it looks like there's 70 to 80, that could be one that maybe think about maybe thinning out a bit as part of the maintenance activities to make sure that it's not crowding out some of the other natives. The feather reed grass on the right, that's actually not a native grass. It's actually adapted to the U.S. But it's on here because it's one that's been used in the basins. It again can tolerate some more moist and wet soil conditions. But it's just a super attractive grass, as you kind of see, very upright, green at the base, and then it takes on has some very nice showy seed heads here about this time of year. I think it's about to 5 foot height. So switchgrass on the left there, that's one you're probably going to see a lot of. It's a good workhorse in these basins because it can tolerate both wet and dry conditions. It typically forms a nice upright clump of grass in the 4 to 5 foot height range. There are a lot of cultivars of this particular grass, so you may just see the straight native species out there. You also may see some of the cultivars that have even more upright habits and varying height and forms. It just kind of depends on the context of the basin of whether or not the cultivars are being used. But it's one that the seed heads are very fine, almost looks like a little cloud that rises above the grass. And then in the winter, you can see there it takes on a nice tan to warm brown color.
I can pretty much say you will have switchgrass in your basin most likely, of some kind.
And the little blue stem on the right, another one of our native prairie grasses. It's also, you're probably going to see it more on the side slopes and upper edges of these basins than rather in the bottom. It does prefer a little more dry conditions. But it's just one of our super hardy, super attractive native grasses. It takes on a really lovely kind of coppery orange fall color that you can see there on the right photo. And its seed heads there are very, very fluffy. And this is one that could seed and move around a little bit, and that's okay because we want it to help fill in gaps. Indian grass on the left. This is one of our taller native prairie grasses. It can get up 5 foot plus. Also has a very nice showy seed head. Takes on kind of a golden color. This is one that's, again, if it finds a spot that it likes, it will reseed and can reseed pretty heavily. So it may start to appear beyond just the plants that were specified in the bottom of the basin. So kind of like with river oats, there may be on a case-by-case basis to make sure that there's the right amount of Indian grass in there and that it's not overtaking the basin. And then the plant on the right, prairie dropseed. This is just a fantastic native grass. Again, it's a one that likes drier conditions, so probably not in the basin bottom, but on the side slopes. It has kind of very thin grass-like foliage, almost just kind of forms a nice fountainy habit. And then it gets kind of, again, light airy seed heads here that would be on the plant right now. And it's kind of unique because if you get a large massing of prairie drop seed, the aroma of the seed heads has been described as anywhere from like cilantro to buttered popcorn. And it's very distinct when you're out there. So that can also just kind of be a good identification marker for that plant. The last one here, this is one that's actually not a native grass, but you may see it on the facilities. Autumn moorgrass. It's a very short little clumping grass. Has some nice little showy seed heads. Again, it prefers more dry soils, so this is not something that would be in the base and bottoms, more on the edges and upper slopes. But it's just a nice little short clumping grass that helps kind of fill in and cover ground. It can provide some nice kind of, almost like a green mulch to some of the taller perennials and shrubs. And then our sedges, there are a ton of sedges. And they tolerate a lot of conditions, from sun to shade, dry conditions to wet conditions. These are just a few that you might see out there. So on the left there, and these are all scientific names that we're using because common names for the sedges, some of them have the same common name and it can get confusing as to which plant is which. So Carex albicans, up in the upper left there, forms a nice little clump. It likes a little bit drier conditions. Same with Carex blanda here. They can both tolerate some shade. Carex stricta on the lower right is one that's a little more wet loving. It can forms a nice solid clump, a little bit taller in the 2 to 3 foot range. Carex pennsylvanica is a very fine textured sedge, prefers a little more shade in dry areas. And in the upper right photo, it's listed as Carex pennsylvanica, but that should be Carex muskingamensis, otherwise known as palm sedge. It's a useful sedge because it has more of a spreading habitat, can tolerate wet conditions, and can spread and fill in around the feet of some of your larger plants. And it may be hard to see in the photo, but the foliage kind of takes on a palm-like appearance.
There's a lot of this out there.
Yeah. Is that your only sedge slide? I can't remember. Yeah. So I'm going to put Brett on the spot here, or any of you. Question: what makes a sedge and a native grass a native grass?
Sedges have edges.
Who
Yeah.
said that back there? Edges. So explain that a little bit more.
The
For the group.
blade.
Yeah, so the blade on the sedges, if you run your finger along it, you'll feel a distinctive little edge kind of down the center. And we'll let you know that's a sedge. The grass blades won't have that edge. And
Sedges have edges.
yeah, we have actual plants here. You can pass them around and you can see it's a very distinct way to kind of tell them apart. And again, the other way, all these sedges are going to be cool season. So you're going to see them, putting up new growth as early as March, whereas your native grasses, all the warm season stuff, they'll be a couple months behind before they really get to their active growth period. And even some of these sedges here, if we have a mild winter, some of that foliage will even kind of overwinter and stay green throughout that season. So it provides some nice attractive color and appearance even during the winter periods.
There's also rush. I don't think we have. Do we have that on?
No, soft rush isn't up here. but-
Soft rush is a plant that we use a lot of, that you're gonna see in the basins.
That might be an added sheet, actually, with some more of these.
Yeah, we're gonna keep adding to this.
And I believe, Ashley, that's identical to what's in those, right?
Yeah.
What he just went through is exactly what's in your those field guides.
I think the goal is not to have everyone memorize every plant. out
Oh,
there,
I don't
but
know.
To learn how to use the field guide to help you identify the weeds and the native plants while you're out there. Yeah.
So we're talking through, speaking of next steps, we're talking through having a part 2 of the weeds and the common plants on site with each company. at one of your facilities. But the idea in that, I think, or Elizabeth, you kind of talked about this. I don't know if we're going to do that fall or if we would be doing that spring. We haven't really made a decision. But you would actually have to go out there and flag, almost as a test, you know. So we'll let you know so everybody can be prepared. But you actually put flags in a 10 by 10 area, pick out all the weeds.
And we can also be a resource for you, especially in the
Yeah.
spring, your first time out at the site. Like, we know these plants, we can meet out on site if there's trouble. Especially, you know, if you're like, is this a weed that we need to take care of, or is it a sedge coming up? I mean, we can help you through that to get off on the right foot.
Yeah, and through this last group on our ones we're doing now, we saw that as very helpful, because once we said, this right here is a, you know, whatever it is, it's a such and such sedge, this is good. Then we're walking around like, oh, I see it there, I see it there, I see it there. So exactly. So it helps you a whole lot of, and we're a resource in this. We're not just out there inspecting. Okay, so the idea is that Elizabeth, you'll see a lot of on site. Ashley, you'll be dealing with a lot, sometimes Brett, but we are a resource in this. As I said, we would like this to be a team effort. We know that there's a lot of effort that's going into this. So that's kind of the end of it. I guess our training session today. Thank you everybody for coming.